The latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. Revisiting a topic that we covered a bit earlier this morning and this week. And it's okay to talk about now because Megyn Kelly said so. We got chastised by Megyn Kelly after Tuesday's election for talking about Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Mark Levin's reaction and Steve Bannon's reaction to Mark Levin's reaction and all of this business of people that present themselves as conservatives, trafficking anti-Semitism, or otherwise enabling those who do. But now Megyn Kelly interviewed Tucker Carlson on her show, so it's okay to talk about. I don't know. To borrow a line of phraseology from Tucker Carlson, I don't know if there's anything that I despise more in terms of the conservative movement than our inability to resist celebrity. Because it so often leads us astray. It dilutes the standards by which we could otherwise hold ourselves. So Megyn Kelly challenged Tucker, saying, the issue is not so much that you can have controversial people on your show, even detestable people. The real criticism that you're facing is the way that you treat those detestable people like Nick Fuentes that you have on your show. And so how do you respond to that?
So the main pushback has been when you had Jeffrey Dahmer or the Ku Klux Klan, et cetera, these journalists went after them, like exposed the terrible things. And Nick Fuentes has said a long list of very vile things.
Big time, including attacking my dad, which was the most vile of all, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I personally have watched videos of him questioning the Holocaust, likening it to baking cookies in the oven, and there's no way you could have gotten to 6 million, seems to be his theory. He seemed to think that we've way overstated the number of Jews killed in the Holocaust. He's ripped on poor Usha Vance in the most offensive terms, which I mean, so what do you say to those people who say, why didn't you raise any of that?
Do your own interview the way that you want to do it. You're not my editor. Buzz off. I mean, I don't know. You want to go yell at Nick Fuentes? I'll give you his cell. Call him and go sit and yell at him and feel virtuous or whatever. That's up to you. I got the same thing with Putin. Why aren't you yelling at him? Okay, why? So I can show that I'm a good person? I care about what my wife thinks, my children think, and God thinks, and that's it. I don't need to prove that I'm a good person to you. You may think I'm a terrible person. Okay, I'm just doing my thing, which is I want to understand what people think. And I'm committed to that. And if you don't like it, don't watch. That's my view. Yep. But that doesn't mean that I share the views. I'm not telling Nazi jokes, obviously, or Holocaust jokes. I mean, please.
It's interesting that he suggests that people suggesting he challenge some of the subjects he has on his show are just wanting to virtue signal. He does that by virtue signaling. Did you catch that? Rather ironic. That's not what we're saying. Did somebody say, I want you to yell at Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson or Daryl Cooper or Vlad Putin or Terrell Cooper or whoever, the Iranian foreign minister? No. I think Carl Truman captures it pretty well in his piece over at firstthings.com. The gig media economy favors pundits who are prepared to transgress boundaries. Their exchange, he's talking about Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, had no real intellectual substance. The two men commiserated with each other over how they had been victimized by establishment conspiracies, and Carlson avoided anything approaching a question that might have challenged Fuentes' well-documented views on Jews and on Hitler. Indeed, even Fuentes' claim to be a fan of Stalin merited no exploration. The interview was all very therapeutic and hardly a replay of Chomsky versus Foucault. Yet it also revealed how some on the right are indulging in the same critical theoretical games as those on the left. So it was sort of a pox on both their houses piece that Truman wrote at First Things about identitarianism, really. Because that's what it is, and that's what I called it earlier in the week when we discussed this. And the point about Stalin too. I raised that. I played that clip. He remembers December 18th as Nick Fuentes as Stalin's birthday. I think that's his birthday. Remembering from the clip, not because I have Stalin's birthday memorized. And then he was questioned why, and he said, "Well, I'm a big fan." And Tucker just sort of set that aside. Well, we'll get to that later. Never did. That would seem to me like a stop moment. No, explore this. And by the way, I want to understand how people think. It may be useful, and this was the Heritage Foundation president, Kevin Roberts' sort of posture at their town hall within the Heritage Foundation to take where some took him to task over the video he posted that he since sort of recanted, at least in part. But the point was that he made is if you want to try to understand like why Nick Fuentes has a significant following online of young men, and we have to understand this as a concern, and we have to do something to address this concern. We have to make a substantive conservative appeal to those same demographics so they understand the difference in terms of what conservatism is versus what Nick Fuentes is peddling. Okay. But that's not what happened with Tucker and Fuentes. I mean, just describing what is. He also said something, just going back to the Truman piece, the philosophical for a second. He talks about the anti-humanist nature of this identitarianism. Approaches that make truth a matter of taste, something with no transcendent binding content. Carlson's interview with Fuentes is a case in point. Its purpose was not denotative, driven by a desire to point out truth. It was connotative, the purpose of creating a transgressive and iconoclastic vibe for the audience. Hence, Carlson's care not to challenge his guest about any of his views that had made him famous in the first place. And that vibe appeals to a fan base made of young men, not surprisingly, in an era when that class has been so consistently maligned. The underlying problem, writes Truman, is not anti-Semitism, it's the anti-humanism that pervades our culture and manifests itself most dramatically in racial identity politics. And he makes the point, critics of Carlson, who have themselves previously denounced opponents of critical race theory as racist or used the preferred pronouns of male killers who happen to identify as women. In other words, critics who have themselves assumed key aspects of the nihilistic world of critical theory might perhaps pause for a moment to ask if they themselves, and not ordinary Christians in the pew, are the ones really complicit in creating the cultural conditions that have made the likes of Carlson and Fuentes both possible, plausible, and popular. Good read. Just on the practical, a good piece by Joe Sternberg over at the Heritage Foundation. Practical in terms of what the Republican Party should do here. He goes to German history, to Sternberg, with a applicable example. Franz Joseph Strauss, none to the right of us principle. This is the 80s in Germany, not the 30s. A major test came in the 1980s amid growing popular discontent over immigration and foreign policy. Sound familiar? A clutch of disaffected Christian social union members splintered off. This is the Strauss Party. It drifted closer to various neo-Nazi ideologues and formed a party called Republicans. They racked up some electoral wins and at their high watermark received 7% of the vote in the 89 European Parliament elections in West Germany. This splinter group's rise led Strauss to articulate formally a principle that had long motivated the Christian Democrats. There must be no democratically legitimate party to the right of the Christian Democrats and Christian Social Union. He meant that on any policy debate, immigration restrictions, social matters, foreign policy, economics, the Christian Democrats should create room for politicians and voters to espouse the most conservative position. This insight was that conservatives must never force voters to elect radical parties to achieve legitimate policy goals. So crowd out the fringe, by clearly articulating a policy rooted in proper conservative thought. And it worked. It worked until Angela Merkel came to town and diluted the party by moving it to the left and opening the borders. So his comment, Sternberg's, on what Kevin Roberts did at Heritage Foundation before he at least partially walked back some of his comments. Strauss thought you should never force voters to elect ideological extremists to get conservative policy. Roberts' a tolerant approach toward the fringe right would achieve exactly the opposite. American voters would have to stomach Fuentes to get border security or tax reform. And that's not what we want to do. So there's the philosophical and the practical, and of course the two are connected, as it's best when they are. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by Leo Liebovitz, editor-at-large for Tablet, host of the Rootless podcast as well. Leo, thanks for joining us and your patience with me. I appreciate it.
A pleasure as always. It's fascinating.
Isn't it? This is just good work, and you've written a topic on this as well over at First Things, no less, entitled False Patriots, that tackles some of these same people and some of the same dynamics that Truman and Sternberg came at from different points of view. But I mean, your distillation, including what you heard Tucker say, is say, look, if you don't like the way I interview the Nick Fuenteses of the world, do your own interview, and people can make their own choices.
Yeah, I think it's profoundly idiotic. Look, Carl Truman, who I'm glad you cited, is truly one of the smartest writers and thinkers we have. I'm just a dumb American. I don't know what's in Tucker Carlson's heart. I do know what he repeatedly puts. What he repeatedly puts on screen. If you don't have the time of day for the senator from Texas, but you sit there for fawning interviews with Vladimir Putin and President Pashinyan of Iran, if you walk around the streets of Moscow and say, hey, look how much better this is than any American city, if you sit there in the White House with J.D. Vance and say, hey, well, I think President Trump made a mistake. We should really sort of like sidle up and coddle the Iranians. I don't care if your pronouns are conservative Republican. You are an Obama Democrat through and through. And I'm also sorry, you're kind of an anti-American jerk. And I don't think anyone should have any patience for that.
The claims that Tucker has made and others, but he persisted in that Megyn Kelly interview, implicitly calling what Netanyahu and the IDF did in the war in Gaza genocide. And he cites this bombing of a Catholic church and suggests that there was no apology, that the implication is that it was intentional, and there's just a complete disregard for non-Jewish life by that government. I just want you, I responded to it, but I want to get your response as well, because I don't think the Israeli state or any politician, Netanyahu, Trump, anybody, is beyond reproach from a policy perspective. And if you want to say what the IDF was doing was genocide, I don't think that's necessarily anti-Semitic. I think it's without foundation. I don't think you can credibly make that claim based on the evidence, but you can say it. This is sort of what people like Tucker have been doing, which is they take an incident that was unfortunate, that does deserve some sort of official explanation that is supported by the evidence, and then they expand that out to have this sort of cosmic meaning or cosmic implication in terms of what these politicians or the state of Israel in this case is doing.
Dan, that's I think exactly right. Look, when you're going to fight a war, especially a war in such like dense built urban territory like the Gaza Strip, you're going to hit some targets, unfortunately, that you don't intend to hit. And the Israeli government apologized right away. But it's exactly as you said, it didn't even matter because Tucker Carlson had previously made up all sorts of canards and lies, including arguing repeatedly and having guests who argued that the violent Israeli settlers have burnt some church in the West Bank, which, 3 or 4 days later turned out to have been a complete invention. But here's what I think is really, really, really important for people to understand. Look, Jews are 2% of the American population. To be perfectly honest, we don't really matter. This attack is not an attack on Jews. It's an attack very, very clearly, and I think orchestrated in a very clever way, on evangelical Christians. Because if you're Tucker Carlson and you're trying to sort of like break the coalition that allowed Donald Trump to become president because you want to take over the Republican Party and turn it into something different, the first thing that you do is attack the most loyal voting bloc to the Republican Party, which is evangelical Christians. And the way you do it is by saying, hey, look, the Jews are attacking Christian churches, therefore you can't support Israel. Therefore, we have to start all this like nonsense about churches and attacks in the Middle East, et cetera, as if Israeli army policy is on the top 10 or even top 20 list that normal American conservative voters care about. This is just an op, and sadly, it's working very well. Tucker has had someone talk about this issue on his show literally every other or every third show that he's done for the past 3 years.
Yeah, I don't know if this is just he's a provocateur and he is, a bit iconoclastic such that when people criticize him or say you can't do this, well, now I'm going to do it 10x. He's sort of has that sort of disposition, and it's mainly that, or it's something that is sort of more nefarious and considered like some plot to take over the Republican Party. I mean, I don't want to get into that sort of theorizing either because I don't know, but it's hard to explain. And this is why I think so many people, including Mark Levin, who said it over the weekend and being critical of Trump, is like, they're still trying to say, like, what happened to you? I don't really understand what you're intending to do with this. And I mean, for a guy as smart as Tucker Carlson, his defenses for things like softball interviews with Nick Fuentes are pretty weak tea.
It's not just his defenses, and I should be very clear. I sort of opened my piece in First Things by admitting I used to like Tucker a lot, both as a media personality and kind of, personally. I went on his show.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely no problem. I have no idea what goes on through his mind, and I don't think it's necessarily useful to try and ascertain, well, why is he doing this? What is the reason? The only thing that you should be doing is actually looking at what this man repeatedly says and does. And what this man repeatedly says and does is put out piece after piece, interview after interview, that does whatever it can to undermine President Trump's agenda and to present America in very much the same light as the woke left presents it, as a sort of nefarious, oppressive place. And that's really all you need to know about Tucker Carlson. You mentioned Daryl Cooper before. Sorry, would any serious Republican or conservative person in their right mind 3 months before a critical election invite some crackpot, quote-unquote, historian to argue that Hitler was the good guy of World War II and Churchill was the bad guy? I mean, it's not just, I failed to ask the right question. Hey, do your own interview. It's like, why do you keep on making these choices? Why is it always Daryl Cooper and the president of Iran and Vladimir Putin and Nick Fuentes? Dude, your entire lineup is just that. You are telling us who you are and what you believe by the guests and the opinions that you keep on promoting. And here's the thing. I don't care at all about the sort of anti-Semitism thing. I care very much about the anti-Americanism.
Leo Liebowitz, editor-at-large for Tablet Magazine, host of the Rootless podcast as well. Leo, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And Leo joined us on the Turnkey.Pro line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Why would you take your precious metal collections to some fly-by-night roadshow that rolls into town once a year? The only thing you need to do is follow